There's always that one legion people swear is the strongest. Some say the Space Wolves would tear through anyone, others claim the Blood Angels were untouchable in their prime, and then there's always that one guy yelling, Ultramarines, like it's a personality trait. But today, we're putting it all on the table and figuring it out once and for all. What's up everyone? Welcome back to A Falling Cow. Today, we're tackling a question that's been bouncing around the Warhammer fandom for years. Which Space Marine Legion was the strongest? We're talking raw strength, battlefield success, technology, fleet size, Primarch strength, you name it. And to keep things fair and maybe start a little chaotic, I'll be ranking all 18 legions on a tier list. So grab a snack, maybe brace for some hot takes, and let's get into it. What's up guys, it's your favorite Falling Cow, back with another video. And today we're going to be ranking every one of the 18 legions from strongest to weakest using tier maker. I know. Why are we using a tier list? Well, I've done one tier list video before this, and it was which Primarch would I guess. So this video is going to be a little bit more, serious, and well, it's probably not going to be very serious because, I have ADHD, but I'm going to try to be as serious as a cow can be and try to rank these guys based on, just lore, their numbers, and just overall how powerful they were during the Great Crusade, the days leading up to the Heresy and the Horus Heresy. I'm going to get into more of the ground rules in a little bit, but I want to just say that I'm going to try to release a tier list video maybe like once a month, maybe like every other month, just because they're easier to get out and edit. And right now I'm sitting on who is the strongest Space Marine from every legion. And that video is so long, guys. It's 2 hours and 30 minutes right now. I did the audio for it yesterday and it was 14 hours of audio. Like you could ask, how does 2 hours and 30 minutes correlate to 14 hours? Well, guys, I'm freaking weird, and every time I feel like I screw something up when I'm talking, I restart the whole sentence or the whole paragraph. It's pretty stupid. I don't know why I do that, but that's probably what adds so much time to it. It's just me being a silly goober. So we're gonna get this tier list out probably, what's today, 6/19. I'm recording this on Thursday, 6/19, so we'll probably get this out today. I've already made the intro. It's already fully edited. So once I finish talking out of my butt, we were gonna get this out because there's no script for this video. It's very similar to which Primarch would I guess. So there's no script. It's gonna be me talking out of my butt, just from my own memory and my own head. So I might get some stuff wrong. I don't think I will, but I probably will at some points, or maybe I won't. I don't know. See, ADHD. It's real. It's real. Oh my god. So yeah, we're looking at all 18 legions. S tier is obviously the strongest of the strong. They could probably take out a whole system by themselves. They have the best technology, the strongest fleet, the most numerous Legionist Astartes, and probably as strong as Primarch. So I mean, that's what S tier is. S tier is. A tier is a little bit below that. They probably are lacking in one quality or the other that makes them, not S tier, but still a pretty strong legionary. B tier is they're all right, they're not like the strongest of the legionaries, but they're decent. They field a pretty good army. They have a good fleet. They're just solid. They're average. C tier is they're deficient in one or multiple categories, which makes me feel like they're not one of the strongest legions, or that the Emperor, or I guess Horus, when the Horus Heresy broke out, did not really favor them. And then D tier, you had no impact on anything. You suck. And I know people are going to be like, what about the Shattered Legions, Falling Cow? What about them? They got absolutely bent over during the Drop Site Massacre. Well, I'm not going to hold the Drop Site Massacre against the Iron Hands, the Raven Guard, and the Salamanders, because simply they kind of, like my fictional voice just said, they got bent over. Their whole legion got absolutely destroyed. And the Raven Guard and the Salamanders, they both have pretty small legions to begin with. I think they have 89,000 Marines in each of their starting ranks. So that they didn't even have big legions to begin with. But then I know the Raven Guard had 4,000 guys at the end of the drop site massacre, and I think the Salamanders might have had less, which is insane. They literally were gone from the rest of the heresy. The Iron Hands, Ferrus Manus is an idiot. I mean, everyone knows that. And he only dropped with only a couple, I think it was only his first company of veterans. So he still had a good, there were still a lot of Iron Hands kicking around. I'm looking at my notes real quick. Yeah, the Iron Hands had over 100,000 Marines, closer to 115 Marines. So they had a good amount, and I don't think they lost that many during the drop site massacre compared to these two. So they were still, you know, pretty kicking around during the heresy, but we'll talk more about this. So, like I said, we're not going to really contribute the drop site massacre into these shattered legions, because simply they didn't know what was going on. They kind of just got shanked in the butt like it was prison, and you drop the soap and you turn around, you're like, oh shit, that's happening. Crazy start to the video, guys. Yeah, so like I said, there's no script. We're going to be kind of talking out of our butt. In regards to the who is the strongest Space Marine from every legion, I'm going to try to get that out next Thursday. I think that's 6/27, 6/26. I'm really going to buckle down and edit the heck out of that thing. So it will be out pretty soon. Just keep your eyes peeled, and please go watch it. I put a lot of research and a lot of effort into this one, and I would just love it if you guys like commented a million trillion times. I mean, I just love it. But I'm kind of interested to see what you guys think of the champions I picked. So pretty much, I'll just briefly talk about this video. I picked multiple candidates for each legion, and then I kind of power scaled each of them, you know, going through their best feats, who had the best, you know, feats, who had the best duels, who just beat the stronger opponents. So, for example, you know, the first legion, you have Corswain, you have Zahariel, you have Aljos, and I didn't like, and then you don't include Luther because he's not a Space Marine. And also, imagine if I included Luther, you guys would rip my head off because I did not pick Corswain. You know what I mean? So then I would go through each of those characters and discuss who had the better feats, who defeated the stronger opponents, and then crown that champion. So I'm really excited to see what you guys think of who I picked, and I kind of just want to, yeah, I think it'll be a fun video. Like I said, we're going to go through each of these 18 legions. So yeah, we're not going to really contribute numbers into this. So like the Ultramarines who have 250,000 Marines, they're not going to automatically go in S tier just because of their numbers. It's going to be a contributing factor. So we're going to look at what actions they did during the Great Crusade, Horus Heresy, and yeah, those two, I guess. I guess those are the only two. And then we're going to look at Primarchs, who has a stronger Primarch. The Primarchs are not going to contribute that much to it, but if it's a significant Primarch, say like Sanguinius, the Blood Angels have Sanguinius, who's one of the strongest Primarchs, or the Thousand Sons who have Magnus, or I guess Fulgrim's pretty strong too. I mean, there's a lot of strong Primarchs. Except for, where is he? Leman Russ, I hate the Space Wolves. You guys already know this. You guys already know I hate Space Wolves. Leman Russ is a strong Primarch, so I can't really shit on him for that. He's just an idiot. Yeah, but I'm excited to go through this. Once again, there's no script. I'm talking out of my butt. I'm honestly very curious to see where I put some of these legions. Like the Night Lords. I should probably talk about this in the actual, you know, beginning of the video, but the Night Lords are really interesting. Like, their role, like, they're assholes, you know, flaying people alive, and Conrad Kurz is a schizophrenic, but, you know, they had a big role to play in the Horus Heresy, and, I mean, I guess we'll talk about this later, you know, in the actual video, but I'm excited. I'm excited to see where I put some of these legions, because I'm going to try to be very unbiased looking at you, Mr. Space Wolf, but yeah, so 18 legions. We're starting with the Dark Angels. Let's get into it. Alright, first up, we got the Dark Angels, the first legion, led by Lionel Johnson, and the most knightly, I guess, of the Space Marine legions, you know, their homeworld's Caliban, so, oh yeah, I forgot Caliban isn't there anymore. Way to go, Luther. Yeah, just a casual bash on the Dark Angels there. The Dark Angels are a very interesting legion. So, I think they are one of the biggest legions in. I know I wasn't going to talk about numbers, and that's the first thing I mentioned. Is funny as hell. I know they are one of the biggest legions. I think they also have one of the biggest fleets as well. So they have one of the biggest legions, Astartes wise, and they have one of the biggest fleets as well. So, yeah, I'm looking at my notes. They have 3 Glorian class vessels, which are the gigantic battle barges of the Legion of Astartes, equivalent to the Vengeful Spirit. So, pretty much say the Dark Angels have 3 Vengeful Spirits, which is pretty crazy. They also have the Dark Age of technology that the Emperor gave them because they are the first Legion. So they have a very big space fleet. They have a very large number of Astartes, and they have a great wealth of technology. I don't know if they really name names on specifically what the Dark Angels have technology-wise, but I know they have a lot of Terminator suits, and I know they have a lot of plasma weaponry, which just already gives them a huge advantage compared to the other Legionist Astartes. I mean, like the World Eaters are literally eating out of bowls compared to the Dark Angels who are living in lavish, eating at Chili's every night, essentially. Crazy metaphor. The World Eaters are eating at McDonald's using the Happy Meal, and the Dark Angels are eating at fucking Chili's. Fuck yeah. Crazy. So we have they have one of the biggest sized legions. They have a big fleet, and they have a lot of technology. But also one thing I've really noticed that people don't bring up the Dark Angels is they have 6 different wings. They have the Raven Wing, the Storm Wing, the Death Wing, the Iron Wing, and I think the Dread Wing. Is that 5? I don't know. I can't count. And each of these wings is designed to fight a different way of warfare. So, for example, the Raven Wing is high speed. They have hit and run assaults, a lot of jet bikes. Then you have the Death Wing, which uses, plasma weapons, Terminators, brute force. And then you have like the Storm Wings, which is good at boarding attacks. So like they have a good variety of Space Marines that can fight different theaters of battle. So say I was going into battle against the Iron Warriors, I would field a different wing. Space Wolves, I would field a different wing. So they have a lot of different methods of, fighting other things. So pair that with a lot of technology, a high standing Astartes count, and you've got a pretty dang strong legion. And let's dive a little bit more into Lionel Johnson. And I think Lionel Johnson is by far one of the best Primarchs. Lionel Johnson is a duelist, first off. He has some of the greatest feats as a Primarch. Let's frickin' dive into it. So he fights Conrad Kurz 4 times during the Horus Heresy. 4 times. He fights, and he beats Kurz, I believe, twice. Loses to him once. I really don't understand how he loses him in the first place. And then I think he draws with him a third time when he's fighting Gilliman, because Kurz set a trap like a silly little terrorist that he is. So Gilliman's a pretty damn strong duelist. In 40K, at an elder age, he killed Demon Prince Angron. Whoa. So he's a pretty strong duelist, first off. He is a genius commander, too. Lionel Johnson is one of the best tacticians in 30K, and I imagine probably the same in 40K. So they have a great Primarch who's very versatile. They have a Legion, huge in size, but is also versatile. They have 3 Glorian class vessels, and I think they have a fleet that is over 1,500 size of ships. So they have a huge fleet, lots of technology. I didn't even mention one of those Dark Age of technologies. They have cyclonic torpedoes, which are world destroyers. What the hell? Let's dive into, but before we scale them, before we rank them, let's dive into like what they did during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. So the Dark Angels, I need to take a breath here. Oh my god, I'm gonna suffocate. Imagine if I suffocated on camera or film or audio. You just hear me, I can't breathe. That'd be crazy. See that, guys, I have ADHD. So yeah, somehow I forgot to breathe while I was talking there. My face, I bet you it looked like a tomato. Okay, so Dark Angels. Let's get back to the subject. So Dark Angels, what do they do during the Great Crusade? So they fight in, the most notable feat is they fight in the 3 Rang Dang Xenocides. And we that we as the 40k community have no idea what the heck a Rang Dang is. But apparently it's really deadly because the Dark Angels lost almost more than half their legion. I think they lost 50,000 Marines in one of those wars, and I think they lost even more, obviously, in the whole war together. So the Dark Angels lost a lot of troops in the Rang Dang Xenocides. So that obviously shows that they are very capable of fighting aliens that wiped out a good portion of the Space Marines. So they fought, they're veterans, and they fought some of the worst wars in the Great Crusade. So they're veterans, a lot of troops, a lot of Dark Age technology, a lot of space fleets. So what did they do in the Horus Heresy? Let's see about that. So the Dark Angels were in the Thramas Crusade, fighting in the Thramas Crusade mostly for the beginning of the Horus Heresy, and they were fighting the Night Lords. So the Night Lords and the Dark Angels were fighting for I think 2 to 3 years before the Dark Angels arrived in Macragge in Ultramar. And the Night Lords were honestly holding their own, but eventually the Dark Angels overwhelmed them. The Night Lords, funnily enough, are not a very big legion, so it's very interesting to see that the Dark Angels were not able to annihilate them instantly, and that the fight was actually quite close. So that does make me kind of ponder, like, how are the Dark Angels not able to destroy the Night Lords? But you could also say that the Night Lords were using, hit and run tactics, so it wasn't really a standing battle. But the Dark Angels obviously did triumph at the end of it. So, I mean, they did pretty much, they shattered the Night Lords. The Night Lords could not recover from that campaign. The Dark Angels easily overcame the casualties they took. And I think they divided into 2 after that war. But I'm getting sidetracked. Another big breath coming here. Holy shit, I'm running out of oxygen, guys. Yeah, so the Dark Angels fought the Night Lords for a majority of the beginning of the heresy, and then they made it to Macragge, and then they kind of divided. Lion took most of his legion and went and bombed and blew up Traitor Worlds, showing off that Dark Age technology, and I think Corswain took 40,000 or 20,000 Marines and fought on Terra during the retaking of the Astronomicon. So the Dark Angels did play a pretty good point in the Horus Heresy. They were big players, you could say. But I would say they have the technology, they have the fleet, they have the Space Marine size, they have a really competent Primarch, which is hard to say these days. And they have a lot of good feats to show that they are like, they're jack of all trades legion, so to speak, but they have the brute force whenever they require it, if that makes sense. So honestly, I would say fucking S tier. Dark Angels are freaking S tier. I think if the Night Lords hadn't fought them in the Thramas Crusade, and the Dark Angels were able to fight Horus at some field or right after Istvan, I think the Horus Heresy would have been prevented. Like literally, if Lionel Johnson had been able to bring his whole legion to bear during the Istvan campaigns, where the Sons of Horus, Death Guard, World Eaters, and who's the fourth? Oh, the Emperor's Children were fighting. I think the Dark Angels might have been able to break the heresy that early on. It's kind of a crazy take, but if Conrad Kurz hadn't prevented Lionel Johnson from getting involved, I think the Horus Heresy could have been over before it even began. Because the Dark Angels are just that strong. They're literally that strong that they had to be stopped by, it was pretty much like the Night Lords were like, hey, hold them as long as you can. And they did, and it resulted in their legion getting absolutely bent over because they could not stop the Dark Angels. I think that is an easy S tier. Lionel Johnson, like I said, great Primarch, great duelist, great commander. I think he's probably one of the best of them. He just has a problem with secrets. So, easy S tier placement. All right, who's next? Oh boy, the Emperor's Children. All right, before we go into the Emperor's Children, I kind of forgot to mention compliances. I wanted to mention compliances in the Dark Angels, and I simply forgot because my brain is the size of a pea. So, the Dark Angels have the second most compliances that doesn't really impact their placement. In fact, it kind of supports why I put them in S tier. So like I said, they have the second most compliances, I think only behind the Ultramarines, and they have a large Space Marine army, competent Primarch, really strong fleet, lots of technology, pretty good feats throughout the Horus Heresy. I think if they had been allowed to fight in the Horus Heresy and they weren't prevented by the Night Lords and then the Ruin Storm, I think they would have been a big impact. So okay, so with that said, let's move on to the Emperor's Children finally. Sorry about that, I totally forgot about compliances. So the Emperor's Children are next, and honestly, they are one of my favorite traitor legions. They are just so screwed up, and I love it. If you guys haven't read the book Fulgrim, their fall to Slaanesh is absolutely amazing. I love the play scene where the noise marines are made, and it's just so screwed up and well done that I absolutely love it. But we're not talking about Slaaneshi corruption, we're talking about the Emperor's Children here. So the Emperor's Children are a mid-sized legion. They have just over 100,000 marines. They have they don't really have the technology that, you know, they have their basic run-of-the-mill 30k technology. One of the things I did want to talk about was the blight issues that the Emperor's Children had. So before Fulgrim was found, the Emperor's Children were pretty low in number because they had a cancerous thing. I think only a couple of them survives, like Fabius Bile, who, you know, switched with someone else because he was an asshole. But yeah, the Emperor's Children had a blight issue, so that means I feel like they don't have as many veterans as you think they would, but they're still a pretty strong legion. You know, they emphasis on perfection, so they have a lot of good duelists, they have a lot of good warriors, but are they as strong as the Dark Angels here is the question. Are they an S tier or A tier legion? And I really don't think so. I feel like the Emperor's Children, they are a pretty strong legion, but they don't really do much during the Horus Heresy due to the Slaaneshi corruption, and I feel like that's kind of on Fulgrim. Fulgrim ascends during the Book Angels Exterminatus, so it's pretty early on during the Heresy that the Emperor's Children, you know, kind of fuck off. I will say that half of them under Lord Commander Eidowan still fight a good portion of the Heresy, and they do have a good run-in with the White Scars, and I believe they defeated them. So I feel like they're still a pretty strong legion. I just don't know if they are A or S tier. They only have one Glorian class vessel, the Pride of the Emperor, which is lost at the end of the Heresy, I want to say, when Guilliman boards it and the Fulgrim and Guilliman have their final fight. So their fleet is alright, mainly broken. I feel like the Legion altogether was kind of shattered during the Horus Heresy. They kind of rejoined briefly before the Siege of Terror began, when Fulgrim, you know, called them all back. So I mean, they're a decently strong legion. They don't have a lot of compliances, what I'm trying to say. Due to the blight issues they faced, they weren't a strong legion at the beginning. There weren't a lot of them, not a lot of veterans, and then they were able to fix the blight after they found Fulgrim and then start doing compliances. So they weren't really on their own for a lot of the Great Crusade. So we can't really say they were one of the greatest legions during the Great Crusade due to the blight issues. So, and then we look at the Horus Heresy. They fought at the Drop Site Massacre. They fought at Istvan III when they purged their legion. And then during the Angels Exterminatus campaign, once Fulgrim ascended, they kind of divided. So they don't really play that big of a role due to the Slaaneshi corruption. Now, I'm not saying they're a weak legion. Like I said, they have a lot of perfection. They seek for that perfection, which means they have a lot of good duelists. You know, you have Lucius the Eternal, you have Eidowan, you have, I think his name is Arcuna. He fights Ferrus Manus and almost beats him somehow, a fucking Primarch. I know, crazy. And then they also have the Enhanced Marines under Fabius Bile. So they have arguably some really powerful Space Marines, but I don't know if they're not a very coherent force throughout the Horus Heresy, and I guess not even during the Great Crusade. Only briefly, when Fulgrim and the Legion are at full strength, do they strike out and have their own campaigns. So with all that, honestly, I don't think they're A tier, but I definitely don't think they're in the bottom rankings. They do play like a pivotal role, you know, fighting the Iron Hands during the Drop Site Massacre, and they do cleanse they do take part in the Laeran compliance, which is supposed to, they weren't even gonna try to conquer the Laeran because of how like strong they were. They were gonna be like, we'll make you guys a protectorate of the Imperium, which I didn't know that the Imperium would take in aliens as like protectorate states. I didn't know that, so that was kind of an interesting tidbit. Sorry, ADHD taking over. But Fulgrim decides to fight him anyways, and he's able to take him out with pretty heavy casualties. So they are able to take in compliance aliens that are, I want to say, not similar to the Rang Dang, but still like a threat. So they fought pretty strong aliens in Xenos, but it's just the facts that happen during the Horus Heresy where they scatter. Let's just dive into the Emperor's Children actions during the Horus Heresy. Let's go step by step. So they fall to chaos, they get corrupted, they purge their legion at Istvan 3. I think they lose a good portion of their legion, I'm not gonna lie. Then they fight in Istvan 5, where Fulgrim kills Ferris, and then they have the Angels Exterminatus campaign right afterwards, where there's still a full legion, but right after Fulgrim ascends, they kind of go do their own thing until Lorgar finds Fulgrim and brings him back into the fold. And then the whole legion is reformed during the Siege of Terra, where they, make people into freaking living drugs. So they have a couple good feats. I know that in between Angels Exterminatus and the Siege of Terra, Eidolon is in control of a good portion of the Legion, and he's fighting the White Scars. And he actually has a lot of good victories, which makes me feel like the Emperor's Children are still a pretty competent Legion. They just kind of suffer from, low numbers, not a very big space fleet, and just overall they're in organization. So I feel like with those factors, I think they're in a solid B tier. I might get some hate for this, but I feel like Fulgrim is a great duelist and he's a very good commander, but that's more of pre-corruption to chaos. Post-corruption, he's kind of schizo, he's obsessed with his excess, and he's just not very present on the battlefield. I would say he's still a really good duelist, probably way stronger than pre-fall Fulgrim, but maybe not a great commander. So I feel like the Emperor's Children are pretty solid in B tier. I mean, they have the Noise Marines, they have some decent technology, and their legionaries are all modified, so they're all pretty strong individuals, but when it comes down to it, I just don't think they have, the advanced technology. They don't have a very big fleet, and they're just not very organized compared to the other legions, and I feel like those feats during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy kind of speak to that, and although they kind of get screwed over by, the whole Blight issue where they don't really fight in a lot of campaigns until Fulgrim is found, I feel like it doesn't really impact it that much, and thus I feel like B tier is pretty solid spot for them. Alright. Oh boy. The Iron Cry-Babin Warriors. What are we going to do with you? I'm going to put on my unbiased cap right now. What are we going to do with the Iron Warriors? Okay. Let's talk about the Iron Warriors a little bit. So the Iron Warriors are led by Perturabo, the Iron Daddy, the Iron Lord, and Perturabo is easily one of the smartest Primarchs. I know I shit on him a lot. He's an engineer. He's a genius. He's one of the best tacticians in Warhammer 40K, probably up there with Dorn, Guilliman, and Horus. So he's pretty damn smart. Definitely one of the best Primarchs. Let's talk about their legion size. The Iron Warriors are also one of the biggest legions. They have 180,000 Marines, which puts them up there with the Ultramarines, the Dark Angels, the Sons of Horus, and the Word Bearers, I believe. So they have a pretty big legion to start things off with. Let's talk about their compliance record during the Great Crusade. The Iron Warriors got some of the hardest campaigns, and they got dealt with the most casualties throughout the Great Crusade. So they're pretty experienced. They know what they're doing, and that what they're doing is siegecraft. And when Guilliman's trying to get back to Terra, the Iron Warrior blockade slows him down enough that Guilliman literally has no impact on the Siege of Terra, and thus the Emperor is put in a state of not funness. So the Iron Warriors are almost the MVPs of the Heresy to me. They probably are the MVPs of the Heresy. Without Perturabo and his genius and his warriors taking, once again, the hardest roles, I don't think that Horus would have been able to wound the Emperor. I don't even think the siege would have happened in the first place. Because the Iron Warriors, they're taking every fortress world, every citadel, and then they are rebuilding these fortresses, so Guilliman has to cut through layer after layer of Iron Warrior cities or citadels just to get to Terra. So already the Iron Warriors are doing so much, and then Perturabo is the one masterminding the whole offense of the siege until, for some odd reason, Horus decides to give it to Mortarion so they can use demons and the Neverborn to overwhelm the Terran defenses. So I get that, but why would you take it away from Perturabo when he has been absolutely, I'm not going to lie, he's kicking Dorn's butt. He's kicking Dorn's butt during the Siege of Terra, and it's not funny. Yeah, so Perturabo is already probably the MVP of the Horus Heresy. And then let's get into their fleet size. It's not that big. They have one Glorian class, the Iron Blood, but they also, I think at their peak during the Siege of Terra, they had a shit ton of vessels that they would use as, cannon fodder. So they did have a pretty big fleet as well. They have a big legion. Obviously, they have a lot of veterans. I just feel like they're not S tier material. I feel like A is a good spot for the Iron Warriors. I don't think they have the technology. They take an extreme amount of casualties. I just feel like A tier is a perfect spot for them. Sure, they have a lot of really good compliances. They fought the Herd. They fought a bunch of crazy Xenos during the Great Crusade. But I feel like A tier is the perfect spot for them. They did carry the Heresy, but at the end of the day, they took extreme casualties doing it. And I feel like A tier, just kind of the perfect spot for them. All right, White Scars up next. All right, Jagatai Khan time, CHACHOW time, as they say. So the White Scars are one of my favorite Loyalist legions, but I'm not going to let that impact me. They're also one of the smallest legions with only 89,000 members, similar to the Salamanders and the Raven Guard. And the White Scars' whole shtick is that they're lightning fast. They have really fast attacks, guerrilla warfare. They don't really prioritize straight up combat. And that's one of their biggest flaws. And it's going to hinder them when I'm ranking this. But we'll talk about it in a second. The White Scars were the Scout Legion. They were kind of the Legion deployed to check things out and report back. So they didn't have a ton of compliances. They did fight a lot of greenskins. That was their chief opponent during the Great Crusade. But they didn't really have that many compliances compared to, Lionel Johnson, Horus Lupercal, or Guilliman. So they just specialize pretty much in scout missions. They don't fight straight up battles. So that's kind of what we see during the Horus Heresy. They are trying to skirmish and, do hit and run attacks on the trader supply lines. And we see them get into a couple straight up battles, space battles with the Emperor's Children and the Death Guard. And the White Scars show that I feel like they are just too good at guerrilla warfare, and that when it comes down to a straight up combat, straight up fight, they get bodied. And that's what we see at the Battle of Castellus with the Eidolon and Mortarion. The White Scars fleet, they are outnumbered, I will say, but they get bodied. They lose their Glorian class ship, what's it called? It's called the Swordstorm. The Swordstorm gets destroyed. It's part of their trap. They try to trap Mortarion, but obviously it doesn't work. So they lose their Glorian class ship. They lose a good chunk of their fleet. So it just shows that the White Scars, they're kind of just they're not a one-trick pony, but they kind of are. But they're really, really good at that trick, and we can see the feats of their legion during the Siege of Terra, where they constantly ride out and hooray the traitor forces, causing massive amount of casualties, killing hundreds and thousands of legionaries and enemy traitor forces. And it's part of the reason why the siege lasted that long was the White Scar's ability to hooray the traitors. Now let's talk about Chagatai Khan real quick. I feel like Chagatai Khan is one of the reasons the siege held out so long because of his actions during the Siege of Terra, and then he retakes the Lionsgate spaceport and slays Mortarion, which is, holy shit, that's a crazy feat. He kills a demon Primarch. It's insane. So the White Scars were almost the MVPs, the loyalists. Obviously, I feel like the Imperial Fist carried the siege. They just had so many of them, and that was their style of warfare, is defense. But the White Scars also had a really big impact on, you know, how long they lasted. But they don't really have a lot of Marines. They don't have a lot of really big feats besides, you know, their hit and run tactics, which are very effective. But at the end of the day, you're only taking a slice of the traitor forces. You're not taking their all out. And when they did have big straight up fights, they kind of got bodied. So they're kind of a one-trick pony, but they're really good at that trick, like I just said. I feel like B tier is where they deserve to go. I'm going to put them in front of the Emperor's Children. And I know you're saying, but Cal, the Emperor's Children beat the White Scars twice in naval battles. Well, I just feel like the White Scars have a lot more more organization. They have a lot better victories, and their Primarch isn't a deranged snake guy. Is that enough? I feel like that's enough evidence to put the White Scars firmly in B tier. I know I'm going to get a lot of hate, but like I said, they're kind of just a one-trick pony. I do want to say before moving on that the White Scars have some of the strongest Psychers in the Imperium. They have the Stormseers, and they have Targutai Usui, who is insanely broken. I mean, that guy literally opens up a portal to the webway and allows the White Scars to escape. So I feel like also the use of Psychers what the White Scars have puts them ahead of the Emperor's Children, but, you know, the one-trick pony stick just firmly places them in B tier. Oh my god. The Space Wolves! Oh boy, you guys know how much I love me some Space Wolves. But, honestly, I'm going to enjoy talking about these guys. I'm going to enjoy it. Alright, Space Wolves, what are we doing with them? Okay, Space Wolves are a mid-sized legion. They have 113 Astartes. They have one of the best duelist Primarchs. Leman Russ is a very strong Primarch, but he's not the best commander. Let's say he's all right. He's all right. They also don't have a very big fleet. They have one Glorian class vessel, and they don't really have a lot of good technology. But let's briefly talk about their Emperor's Executioner role. So that title makes me believe that the Space Wolves are very good at Astartes on Astartes combat, which means they have a lot of good duelists. They have probably a really good coordination, and that just means they're very good at fighting other Space Marines. And we kind of see this when they are deployed to go fight the 1,000 Suns. Now the 1,000 Suns, guys, broken. They are broken. Imagine a whole Psyker Legion with a Primarch who is the second strongest Psyker in the universe. So the 1,000 Suns are already really powerful, and the Space Wolves are sent along with the Sisters of Silence and the Custodes to help bring them in, which makes me believe that the Space Wolves are already considered a pretty good legion. You know what I mean? They have that title as the Emperor's Executioner. It must mean something. And I'm not going to bring in the stupid decision the Space Wolves made during the Horus Heresy and mainly Leman Russ, because that doesn't really impact the title of strongest. It merely means that they're fucking stupid. I feel like the Space Wolves are a pretty strong legion, and the Space Wolf fans are like, what the fuck? This is the biggest 360 turn of my life. And I think the Space Wolves are a pretty strong legion. I feel like since they got deployed to stop the 1,000 Suns, that implies that they have the capabilities to defeat the 1,000 Suns, which means they probably have some pretty good fighters. They have some pretty strong legionaries. They also have the Ruin Priests, which is the silliest thing Leman Russ has ever done. He's like, I don't like the warp. And then he has a bunch of ruin priests, psychers with him. Hey, buddy, take a look in the mirror. You're kind of a hypocrite. So they have ruin priests. They have some pretty strong legionaries. And that title of the Emperor's Executioner makes me believe that they already are they're a pretty strong legion. And when you pair that with Leman Russ, who is probably one of the strongest Primarchs, and I know Space Wolf fans are like, what? A falling cow's like actually saying nice thing about the Space Wolves? Guys, they're still freaking furries. Shut up. But yeah, Leman Russ probably is one of the strongest Primarchs. He almost beats a Chaos Corrupted Horus, which is already an insane feat. So you have a really strong Primarch, a really strong legion with a lot of powerful warriors, and then you have the Ruin Priests. So I feel like they have a pretty strong legion if the Emperor sent them to go fight the 1,000 Suns. But they don't really have a very big fleet, and their legion isn't that big in size. So I feel like A tier is where I'll put them. I'm not, once again, putting into the ranking their stupid ass decisions they make, but they are a really strong legion that they were able to fight the 1,000 Suns on Prospero, fight in the trap that Alpha Legion set for them at the Alexius Nebula, go to Terra, and then attack the Sons of Horus all by themselves. So I feel like all those feats really show that the Space Wolves are a pretty strong legion. They just make a lot of stupid ass decisions. And oh my god, my Imperial Fists are next. Oh, easy try. I'm just kidding. Let's go into these guys for a little bit. So the Imperial Fists have by far the strongest space fleet. I'm not kidding. They have one of the strongest space fleets in the Imperium. They have the Phalanx, which is the best ship. It's a literal walking fortress in space. And then they have 2 Glorian class spaceships. So they already have the best fleet. And then they have Rogel Dorn. Rogel Dorn is one of the best commanders. He's one of the best defenders. And just an overall swell guy. I love Rogel Dorn. He's my autistic king. Just like me. So the Imperial Fists, they're a pretty strong legion. They don't really have that big of a legion though. There's only 100,000 of them. And that means they're probably like a mid-range legion. They have a little bit less than the Space Wolves, a little bit more than the White Scars. So they're around that mid-range legion. Nothing to compare to the Sons of Horus or the Ultramarines. So they have a mid-range legion. What do they do during the Great Crusade? The Great Crusade, they spend most of the time, they have a good amount of compliances, nothing to really brag about. Once again, not comparable to the Sons of Horus or the Ultramarines or the Dark Angels, but they have a good amount of compliances. But the Imperial Fist's biggest role happens during the Siege of Terra. So besides, fortifying the homeworld, what else do they do? Well, they have the Battle of Fall. The Battle of Fall cements what I just said when they kick Perturabo's freaking ass. Perturabo attacks the Imperial fleets, the Imperial Fist fleet at Fall, and the Imperial Fists, which are completely outnumbered, stranded in real space, beat the shit out of Perturabo and his numerous space fleet. And it's not even led by Rogel Dorn, it's led by Alexius Bolax, the GOAT. So Perturabo almost gets defeated by the Imperial Fist fleet, which, mind you, is outnumbered, and they only retreat because Rogel Dorn somehow gets a message through the warp storms that are going across the galaxy. It's kind of bullshit, kind of plot armor that Perturabo got saved by. But the Imperial Fists show that their fleet is no joke. And then we get to the Siege of Terra, and the Imperial Fists are by far the MVP of the Siege of Terra. Sure, the White Scars sally forth are really important. Taking the Lionsgate Spaceport, really important. The Blood Angels holding the walls with Sanguinius killing demon after demon. But it wouldn't be possible if the Imperial Fist hadn't built such a strong fortification. And for those reasons, I feel like they are one of the strongest legions, and they were able to hold off such a great amount of traitor forces. But like I said, they aren't a very big legion. They don't really have any technological advancements. They do have frickin' Sigismund. So I feel like it's tough, guys. It's a tough one. I don't want to show my bias. I don't want to show my bias and just throw them in S tier. but they really do a lot during the Siege of Terra. If the Imperial Fists were traitor, if they had not taken part in the Horus Heresy, the Imperium would have fallen. It would have fallen so much easier than it did. And since they have such a good fleet, they have so many important factors during the Horus Heresy, and that Rogal Dorn is both a combatant genius and he's a duelist king. I feel like A tier is where they should go. I don't think that they are the Dark Angels. I don't think if the Imperial Fists had fought, at the Dropside Massacre or Istvan, I don't think they would have changed much. Like the Dark Angels. If the Dark Angels had fought at Istvan or Dropside Massacre, everything would have changed. Sons of Horus Horus Lupercal might have been killed. The Imperial Fists, I don't think they would have changed much, just because they don't have a very big legion. But due to the facts I just stated, they have a big fleet. Their Primarch is one of the best commanders in 40k, and due to their presence during the Siege of Terra, which prolongated the siege, I feel like A tier is a pretty good spot for them. Oh boy, the Skin Flame Mother Heckers of the 8th Legion are next, and we're gonna get real schizophrenic here, folks. So the Night Lords are kind of a tough one. They don't really do a ton of compliances during the Great Crusade, since they're too busy flailing people alive, and Conrad Kurz is a schizophrenic. But I think their biggest feat that we can really see if they're strong is during the Horus Heresy. So during the Horus Heresy, the Night Lords fight at the Dropside Massacre, and then they fight the Dark Angels during the Thramas Crusade. And, you can't really see a lot from the Dropside Massacre besides, the murdering Loyalist legionaries, the Salamanders and Raven Guard. But I feel like the Thramas Crusade shows that the Night Lords are very good at hit and run tactics and ambushes. They're very good when they splinter their fleets up and they fight from the shadows, but in straight up battles, they do not do well, which, is the common Night Lord theme, that they're freaking cowards. So, but them fighting the Dark Angels is pretty good. They do not have a big legion either. There's only 89,000 of them. They don't have a big fleet either. They only have one Glorian class Nightfall. So they don't really have a big legion. They don't have a big size. They didn't do shit during the Great Crusade. They're only really known for is them fighting the Dark Angels. And even then, at the end of the Thramas Crusade, their whole legion is shattered, and I think it's 1/5 of them is killed, annihilated, and the Nightfall itself, I think, is destroyed, or it's taken by the Painted Count. Either way, the Night Lords cease really being a legion during the Horus Heresy, which I think is the only legion to actually, that happened to it. Like the Salamanders are still legion, the Raven Guard are still legion, the Iron Hands are still technically a legion. They just got absolutely murked, stabbed in the back, spoon in the butt. What the fuck am I saying? Yeah, but the Night Lords, they get shattered pretty early on by the Dark Angels. And the Dark Angels, sure, they held them off, but the Dark Angels are still able to exist. They're still able to fight in the Horus Heresy. They were merely kind of a brick wall, a speed bump, so to speak. The Night Lords were literally a speed bump for the Dark Angels. And that's all they kind of did during the Horus Heresy. They fought the Dark Angels, and then they shattered. And some of them got to the Pharos spotlight and shut that down, but only a few of them even made it to the Siege of Terra. So they didn't really have a big role because they got destroyed by the Dark Angels. And sure, the Dark Angels are one of the strongest legions, but I feel like that shows that the Night Lords themselves are not a very strong legion. Let's talk about Conrad Kurz before we dive even further. Well, Conrad Kurz, he's a terrible commander. He's schizophrenic. He's an idiot. He's loopy. But he is one of the strongest Primarchs somehow. Conrad Kurz has the ability of foresight. So foresight means that he can see the future briefly. It's very briefly, but throughout the books, if you read them, like Unremembered Empire, it shows that he can see the possible futures and he'll know what steps will take. So for example, if he's fighting a Dark Angel, if he kills that Dark Angel, he'll be able to see what happens after that. Or if he's trying to step out a door, he'll see the events following him stepping out of a door. Kind of a stupid metaphor to use, but that's Conrad Kurtz's powers. So he's a pretty strong Primarch. They do fight the Dark Angels for quite a bit of time during the Thramas Crusade, but they really don't do much besides that, and they have such a small fleet, such a small legion, and their tactics are all about scare tactics. That doesn't really make them a strong legion, it just makes compliance and conquering really easily. And when they do fight in straight up battles, they kind of get their butts kicked, like I said, during the Thramas Crusade. And then we even see this in like single fights with the Blood Angels when they try to fight during the Siege of Terra. They are the first ones on the walls, I guess, during Terra, but then they immediately get killed. Like the Painted Count, who's supposed to be the Lord Commander of the Night Lords, immediately dies to Rolderon during the first minutes of the Siege of Terra officially beginning. So I feel like they don't really show that they're that powerful. And I might get some flack for this, but I'm going to put them in C tier. Merely because they did hold the Dark Angels at Thramas for 2 years, I believe. But literally outside of that, they don't do much. And I feel like they're not a very strong legion. Merely because they're cowards, they don't fight straight up battles, and they're pretty small. So C tier I feel like is the perfect spot for our boys, the Night Lords. And now we're going to talk about one of my favorite legions, the Blood Angels. So the Blood Angels are next, and they are one of my favorite legions. Let's just talk about that for a second. The Blood Angels, their aesthetic is so cool. Their Black Rage, the Red Thirst, so cool. Their Primarch, the best boy. There's just so many things that I love about the Blood Angels, and they are also one of the best legions. Let's get into that. So first off, they are, I feel like, a mid-sized legion. Let me check my notes real quick. I think they are a mid-sized legion. Yeah, they have 120,000 Marines. So a good number of Marines. That means they're probably around a mid-sized legion. Nothing comparable to the Ultramarines, the Dark Angels, Sons of Horus, the Iron Warriors. But they are right around the middle of the pack. They also don't have a very big fleet. I think they only have one Glorian-class ship, the Red Tear, which I think they lose pretty early on during the Horus Heresy during Cygnus Prime. But, so they don't have a very big legion, they have a mid-sized legion, don't have a very big fleet. What do they have? They have Sanguinius. Now, Sanguinius is, in my opinion, the strongest Primarch. Sanguinius has foresight comparable to Conrad Kurz. He knows when he's going to die, and that is a power buff. It's a huge power buff because during the Siege of Terra, Sanguinius knows that he's going to fight Horus Lupercal on the Vengeful Spirit, and that means that he can literally do all this baloney. He literally has plot armor. He kills a Warhound Titan by himself and then scares 3 others off during the book The Lost in the Dam, or is it the First Wall? Either or, but Sanguinius, he is that guy during the Siege of Terra, and him alone makes the Blood Angels such a strong legion. Now let's go through what they do during the Great Crusade. The Great Crusade, they have a decent amount of compliances. They're not the highest ones compared to the Ultramarines or the Sons of Horus, but they do have a good amount of compliances. But during the Horus Heresy is where we really see this legion shine. So what do the Blood Angels do during the Horus Heresy? So the first actions the Blood Angels participate in is the Cygnus Prime campaign. And the Cygnus Prime campaign is where Horus Lupercal and Erebus trapped Sanguinius and the Blood Angels in a system full of demons, essentially. So they have a run-in with Chaos, they have no idea what it is, and they still manage to defeat it. And that's mainly because of their defect, the Red Thirst. Now, for those who don't know what the Red Thirst is, it's pretty much where the Blood Angels become ravenous and go crazy mode. They want to drink your blood. They're Edward from Twilight, yeah. Team Edward, let's go. Fuck you, Jacob. Yeah, fuck you, Space Wolves. Yeah, so the Blood Angels, they get really thirsty, I guess you could say, and they start lashing out. They become empowered, pretty much. And that's one of the reasons why they're such a strong legion, is because of this defect. And it's kind of funny, they become literal vampires. So they defeat the Chaos Forces of Cygnus Prime. Sanguinius kills not one, but 2 greater demons of Corrin and Slanesh. I think it's Chris and Kabanda. So Sanguinius already shown off his powers, kills 2 greater demons. From there, I believe they go to Ultramar, where they kind of sit around for a little bit, and then they break through the Ruin Storm, getting to Terra. Now, I think the next big battle they find in is Better Garmon, which is the Titan battle, but I really want to talk about the Siege of Terra. And here we really see the Blood Angels shine, as their legionaries are slaughtering the traitors and the Neverborn, and it really just shows that the Blood Angels are strong combatants. Like, every single one of them is a pretty good duelist, pretty powerful one, and it even gets better for them, or I guess worse for them, when Sanguinius dies. When Sanguinius dies, the Black Rage unleashes across all the Blood Angels that are still alive, and they kick ass. You have Nasir Ahmet literally creating a mound of corpses. You have Rolderon killing just staring Terminators with his fingernails, and the Blood Angels are going rampant. So I feel like where they lack in numbers, fleet size, they make up in prowess. So they have a really strong Primarch, they're really strong legionaries by themselves. I think it's comparable to the Emperor's Children. The Emperor's Children have really strong individual legionaries, but the Blood Angels have the Red Thirst and the Black Rage. And I think those two contributing factors, and the fact that Sanguinius is a monster in combat, means they're A tier. They don't have a very big legion, they don't have a very big fleet, they don't have any significant technologies, but their legionaries themselves and the fact that their Primarch is an absolute god, I'm going to put them ahead of the Space Wolves at A tier. Now, I feel like the Iron Warriors did a lot more than the Blood Angels. The Blood Angels simply made it to Terra. They didn't really fight a lot of traitors until Terra, while the Iron Warriors pretty much carried the whole weight of the traitor movement until Terra. So I feel like they'll still be ahead of the Blood Angels in strength. Right now, they're currently the third strongest. Probably will change soon. But I feel like when compared to the Imperial Fists, the Imperial Fists have a better fleet, they have better legionaries, which I feel like puts them ahead of the Iron Warriors. You could totally argue with that, but I feel like the Blood Angels, like I stated earlier, are just a solid A spot due to just simply the prowess of their legionaries and the god tierness of Sanguinius. Alright, Iron Hands are up next, and this is going to be a tough one. So the first Shattered Legion we have here, the Iron Hands. Now the Iron Hands suffer, from the Dropside Massacre, and then the death of Ferrus Manus, the walking floating head. So they kind of get screwed over, but they have some of the best compliance record from the Great Crusade. For those who don't know, there was a 3-pronged attack or 4-pronged attack out into the galaxy of the Great Crusade. One of the prongs was led by Rapute Gurliman, one was led by the Big E himself, one was led by Horus Lupercal, and the other was Ferrus Manus. So Ferrus Manus is a great general, and he doesn't really get a lot of love from GW. They make him look like a freaking idiot, and it drives me nuts because Ferrus Manus, he should be a genius. And what they say about Ferrus Manus, like Gilliman literally calls him one of the Dauntless Few, one of the best Primarchs from the Great Crusade. Horus literally says if Ferrus was with him, they would have already been at Terra. It just drives me nuts because what we actually see from Ferrus is he is a man-child, he's an idiot, and he hates everything. And it drives me up a freaking wall, guys. It pisses me off. So I'm just going to say that Ferrus Manus is a great general. He's not a good duelist. As we know, he loses his head. So he's not a good duelist, but he's a really good commander. Now, if we look at the Imperial Fist numbers, the Iron Hands numbers, they have a mid-range legion. There are 113,000 of them. So mid-range, not a big legion. They also only have one Glorian class fleet. So they have a smallish fleet, not a lot of ships, decent-sized legion, but they have a lot of good results. And why is that? Well, I would contribute that to their technology. So the Iron Hands have a very good relationship with the Mechanicum. They also have one of the most innovative Primarchs. Ferrus Manus was literally able to look at any technology anywhere and be able to replicate it and in fact make it better. So they have a genius Primarch who is he's a genius at building things, and they pair that with their own technology. Now, outside of Ferrus Manus, they also have, technology like the Keys of Hell, where they can resurrect their own Space Marines. And there's also the fact that most of their Space Marines are cyborgs. They're part man, part machine. So they they have Marines that are pretty strong right off the bat because, you know, the flush is weak. So the Iron Hands, pretty solid legion, and they just get screwed over by the Horus Heresy, where they are unlucky enough to participate during the drop site massacre. So where to put them? They have a pretty good Primarch. He's a genius commander, not a very good fighter, mid-range legion, not a very big fleet, but very strong technology. But if we look at the Horus Heresy, what do the Iron Hands do? And I know I'm not going to bring up the drop site massacre, but the Iron Hands are still pretty strong in strength, numbers wise. They only lost a couple thousand Marines, their first company, I believe, and obviously their Primarch. But what do they really do? Well, nothing. And that makes me feel like they aren't that strong of a legion. If they were the Blood Angels, if they were the Imperial Fists, who lost their legion, their Primarch. God, I can't speak. If they lost their Primarch, I feel like they still would have been pretty significant during the Heresy. But the Iron Hands, they still have the numbers, but they just don't really do much. And I feel like that means they aren't A tier, they ain't S tier, they definitely aren't C tier. They do have a pretty good track record during the Great Crusade. I feel like B tier, behind the White Scars and the Emperor's Children, is a pretty good spot for them. The Iron Hands honestly are the classic example of Games Workshop fucking something over. The Iron Hands, they didn't get destroyed during the drop site massacre. They had the numbers. Where the hell were they? Like, what are you doing, GW? I know that there's the Shattered Legion plotline with Shadrach Medusan, but why wasn't the Legion able to assemble again and actually do something of worth? And that just really cements their spot in B for me, and it's all Games Workshop's fault. It's all Games Workshop's fault. Blame them. All right. B tier for Iron Hands. Blood for the Blood God next. Skulls for the Skull Throne. What are we doing with the infamous World Eaters? You like how I took the old World Eaters Pauldron? I wanted to do the blue and red, or the blue and white, but I don't like the red and gold, which is a crazy take, but I'm more of a pre-Heresy World Eater fan. So what do we do with the World Eaters, the 12th Legion? I'm honestly a big World Eaters fan. I love the World Eaters, I love their fall, and I love the Butcher's Nails. But with that said, they're a bunch of idiots. The World Eaters are a pretty big legion, there's 150,000 of them. But the problem with the World Eaters is they're all implanted with the Butcher's Nails, which is kind of a stat nerf and a stat buff. Because think about it, they can't think coherently. There's literally scenes in the book Betrayer where Karn wants to think logically, but he has to throw himself at stupid decisions like charging an Ultramarine shield wall all by himself because the Butcher's Nails are humming in his ears. So they can't think tactically. They have to kill, they have to maim, they have to burn. So that's the problem with the World Eaters. And that means they're not a very strong legion. Sure, they can kill and massacre whole civilizations, but when you look at the Space Wolves pulled that trick on them during the Night of the Wolf, where Angron, was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna kill you, Lehman Russ, and he beats him in single combat. I don't want to hear these Space Wolf fans saying, wait a minute, Fallen Cow, wait, you said that Angron didn't beat, he did beat Lehman Russ and shut up, Space Wolf furries. Sorry, I'm being so mean to you guys right now. I need some coffee. I'm getting tired. No, but the Space Wolves pretty much trapped Angron, and they could have killed him if they wanted to. And that's because none of the World Eaters gave a fuck about Angron. They just wanted to kill because of the Butcher's Nails. But we'll get into that more in a second. So the World Eaters are a pretty big legion. They do have a pretty smallish fleet. They only have the Conqueror as their Glorian class vessel. I don't think their expedition fleets were very big, so they have a small fleet compared to the rest of the legionaries, but a decent sized legion itself. What do they do during the Great Crusade? Not much. They massacre a lot of civilians, they kill a lot of civilizations, but they aren't like the Ultramarines, the Sons of Horus, the big dogs. They don't have a lot of compliances. So what do they do during the Horus Heresy? Now, Horus Heresy, They fight in the Drop Site Massacre. They fought on Isstvan. They fought on Isstvan 5. They fight in the Shadow Crusade, and then they fight during the Siege of Terra. Now, what they do during the Shadow Crusade is, it may seem like, whoa, that was pretty cool from the World Eaters. They literally just went around massacring civilizations because they needed to. Tis Lorgar needed to build the Ruin Storm from the dead souls from Ultramar. Now, if the World Eaters, that wasn't the design goal of the Shadow Crusade, they would have been screwed because Angron needed to kill things. Imagine if they had to go take Macragge or Kalth. They wouldn't have been able to do that because Angron was stopping at every single planet to kill things. So they may be a really big-sized legion, but when it comes down to it, is the Butcher's Nails are such a negative buff on your intellect that the World Eaters are pretty much a pack of frothing berserkers that are only there to kill things. So they aren't very smart tactically. They don't have any technology. I mean, their technology is the Butcher's Nails, which is the kind of a negative thing, like I just said. So they don't really have... They're like, sure, they're a strong dueling legion. They have the Gladiator Pits. They have Karn. They have Cargo's Bloodspitter. They have Valers, one of the best duelists in the World Eaters. Like, they have strong individual legionaries, but the Butcher's Nails are just such a negative nerf on them that I can't say they're a very strong legion. In fact, right after the Siege of Terra ends, they pretty much break up because they start killing each other. I mean, Karn becomes Karn the Betrayer after he literally burns the World Eaters' safe havens when they're fighting the Emperor's children. It's crazy, guys. So I feel like, similar to the Night Lords, they, sure, they have some big moments in the Heresy, but overall, I don't think they're a very strong legion. They're pretty much a wild card. You throw them at the enemy, they kill things, but you can't really direct them. So if, say, you were the Ultramarines, you could set them a trap and wipe out their whole legion if you really wanted to, because they're so controlled by the Butcher's Nails that they aren't a coherent fighting force, which is part of what makes a strong legionary strong. So they may have the numbers, they don't have the fleet size. What about their Primarch? You know what? Let's put it back here. Let's talk about Angron. Angron is, without a doubt, one of the strongest Primarchs in 30k. I would say he's top 5, maybe top 4, maybe top 3. He literally beats Leman Russ. Shut up, furries. He beats Leman Russ. He literally holds up a Warhound Titan, and he easily clowns on Guilliman. Now, Guilliman isn't an amazing feat, but he clowns on Guilliman like he's a clown. That was a terrible metaphor. What am I saying? I'm going crazy. So Angron is a very strong Primarch. Is he a smart one? He abandons his legion at every opportunity. He's not a commander at all. He is just like his own soldiers, controlled by the Butcher's Nails. So C tier is where I'm going to put him. I really like the World Eaters. They're such a cool legion. I love how they're just all about killing things. Kill, maim, burn, blood for the blood god, blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne. That was like Michael Jackson there. What if Michael Jackson was a Cornite berserker? That's my next Cow's Corner video. No, but the World Eaters, they're just so inhibited by the Butcher's Nails that I just can't put them in there. That's their defect. That's what puts them in C tier. I think that's a good ranking for them. All right. Ultramarines next. Now, the Ultramarines, wow. This is easy. S tier. S tier easily. The Ultramarines have Guilliman, one of the best Primarchs. He's such a logistic mastermind. He's a genius. And surprisingly, he's a very good close combatant. Even though he gets his butt kicked in every single Primarch duel, those are Primarch duels, he's still a pretty strong combatant. And when you think about it, he doesn't die in any of those fights, guys. He doesn't die. He fights Magnus, doesn't die. Fights Demon Primarch Fulgrim, kinda dies. Fights Angron, doesn't die. Fights Logar and Angron at the same time, doesn't die. He just gets beat, but he's not dying in these fights. So I mean, I might be giving him a little bit of lean room there. But what about the Ultramarines? The Ultramarines have the 500 worlds, first off. the Ultramar realm, which means they can draft troops from that whole area. They can draw supplies from the whole Ultramar realm. They can build ships from the whole Ultramar realm, which is insane. I feel like the Ultramarines easily are the strongest legion. Sure, the Dark Angels have technology, but they only have Caliban. The Ultramarines they can forever keep growing their legion at the time of the Horus Heresy breaking out. And that's why Horus Lupercal directed two major attacks on the Ultramarines. The battle at Calth and the Shadow Crusade. Now, the battle at Calth fractured the legion. It just almost destroyed the Ultramarines fleet, and it almost destroyed the Ultramarines legion because their whole legion was assembled there. The whole fleet was assembled there, and it still didn't destroy them. The Ultramarines were still able to gather their forces, redirect them, and then go battle Lorgar and Angron during the Shadow Crusade, where we see at the end of Betrayer when Guilliman, Lorgar, and Angron are fighting. That's crazy. Imagine losing almost all of your legion and you're still able to pick up more, retrain them, regroup, and go fight the Shadow Crusade. It's crazy. Like, when you look at it, Horus knew he had to get rid of the Ultramarines or the Horus Heresy would have ended. It's pretty much like I said earlier, if the Ultramarines or the Dark Angels were there at the Drop Site Massacre, there wouldn't be a Horus Heresy. And sure, the Ultramarines only have one Glorian class, the Macragge's Honor, but they still have so many damn ships. It's said that Calth was literally similar to the Saturn fleet yards. Like, the Ultramarines would have been able to build ships similar to the other 17 Legions shipyard, which is at Saturn. That's crazy. And if this Calth hadn't been destroyed, who would have knows? But the Ultramarines are still one of the strongest legions in the setting, that in fact, they alone were able to take out the whole traitor blockade set around Terra. While the Blood Angels blitzed to Terra and the Dark Angels fought the traitor homeworlds, the Ultramarines alone were steamrolling towards Terra by themselves. They have the numbers, they have a gigantic fleet, they have a genius Primarch. They are without a doubt one of the strongest legions, and I know that's such a vanilla take, but it's true, guys. It's so true. The Ultramarines, if they were there, if they were at Terra, if they were anywhere during the Horus Heresy, they would have made a difference. And that's why the Ruin Storm is such a big deal, because it cut off the Loyalists from having not one, but two of the best legions in all of 30k present during Terra. And it just shows and supports why the Ultramarines are easily S tier and easily the strongest Space Marine Legion. Alright, I'll stop sucking girly men's dick, guys. Death Guard are next. Death Guard are next. The Death Guard are a pretty interesting legion, to be honest. They are pretty much the Iron Warriors, but without crying. They are all about endurance. They are all about always moving forward. And I like the Death Guard. They're a pretty cool traitor legion. I like how they resisted to the very end, and then they fell to Nurgle like a bunch of pieces of shit, which they literally kind of are because they're obsessed with diarrhea. But the Death Guard, where to put them? So the Death Guard are a pretty small legion. There's only 89,000 of them. But what they make up with the amount of endurance they have and just their overall compliance record. So the Death Guard fought a lot of tough foes during the Great Crusade, and they did pretty darn well if I remember correctly. And during the Heresy, the Death Guard fought in multiple campaigns. They were honestly one of the biggest driving forces for the traitor legions. They fought Jagatai Khan at Prospero, and then they chased him for quite some time, even taking the Swordsmith, the Glorian class White Scar, out of commission. So they were honestly a pretty big driving force, but they are just such a small legion. And then during the Siege of Terra, they didn't do a ton. They were constantly repulsed, and they did lose the Lionsgate spaceport, even after getting Nurgle's corruption. So where to put them? They are great during the Great Crusade. They did decently well during the beginning of the Horus Heresy. They kind of fell off towards the end. Smaller fleet, smaller legion. Great Primarch, though. Mortarion is a pretty great Primarch. Great commander. He knows what he's doing. He's not a jackwagon. He's not an idiot. He's not the strongest, though. He's very tanky, but he's not a very good offensive Primarch, as we see with his duels with the Khan. Jagatai literally cuts his head off when he's a demon Primarch. So I'm going to put the Death Guard in B tier. I'm going to put them on the White Scars. I feel like they are one of the stronger legions, but I feel like they're just smaller in size. They can't have the best impact on the heresy. Once again, I'm not really taking the numbers into equation, but they didn't really do a lot during the Siege of Terra, even after getting the Nurgle aids. So I feel like B tier is a pretty good spot for them. They are a pretty strong legion. They are one of the support factors for Horus's drive to Terra, but I feel like they didn't really do a lot, which makes me feel like they aren't that strong of a legion. If they had a bigger fleet, had more technology, had a maybe stronger Primarch, I could justify them being an A tier, but I feel like the Death Guard are a solid B tier, and hey, they're the head of the B tier pack. So you're welcome, Death Guard fans. The 1,000 Suns are next, and let me just say first, Magnus did nothing wrong. Let me say it again. Magnus did nothing wrong. Let me say it again. Magnus did nothing wrong. All right. Just had to get that out of my system. So Magnus did nothing wrong. The 1,000 Suns. Where to put them? Easy. S tier. S tier. The 1,000 Suns are, without a doubt, one of the strongest legions. Imagine a whole legion of Psychers. That's the 1,000 Suns. They are so powerful. They have different sects for each type of Psyker. They have people that can predict the future. They have people that can heal, use wards, offensive spells. There's so many, there's like so much variety with the 1,000 Suns that they can fight you with psychic warfare in any avenue. And since none of the Legionis Astartes are specialized to fight Psychers, it's pretty tough to say that they aren't one of, without a doubt, the strongest legions. Sure, there aren't a lot of them. I think there's only 80,000 1,000 Suns, which is kind of funny. What? It's the 1,000 Sun name is because there was only 1,000 of them when they were formed, right? Whatever, it doesn't matter. But they don't have a big fleet. They only have one Glorian class, but they are so, it's like each individual 1,000 Sun is probably worth 5 to 10 other Space Marines. That's how powerful they are. It's crazy. And then we don't even talk about Magnus the Red himself, who is without a doubt the strongest base Primarch. Magnus is that guy. He is the strongest Psyker, second strongest Psyker in the Imperium behind Big E himself. Magnus could sit on the Golden Throne forever, and that was the end goal. He is the strongest Primarch easily due to his Psychic abilities. And when you look at what the 1,000 Suns did during the Great Crusade, you're like, Falling Cow, they didn't really do much. Well, that's because they're a bunch of nerds and they love collecting knowledge. I'm not going to say I'm not going to take their compliances really into account because they're just gigantic nerds, you know? They're just so obsessed with collecting knowledge that they were so slow. And then if you look at the burning of Prospero, the Emperor sent the Custodes, the Sisters Silence, and the Space Wolves to take them out, and the 1,000 Suns still put up their hands and balled out. They destroyed the Space Wolves. The Space Wolves have only like half their legion left after the burning of Prospero. It's crazy. And the 1,000 Suns weren't even prepared for an invasion. They didn't have their fleet, they didn't have their defenses up, and they still kicked ass. I feel like that's, without a doubt, easily a support to why the 1,000 Suns are one of the strongest legions. It's pretty easy to say that, and I think they fall behind the Ultramarines and the Dark Angels because simply the Ultramarines are without a doubt so numerous. They have such a big fleet. They are just capable of producing so many Marines, and then the Dark Angels have the insane Dark Age of technology, which is kind of silly to say that. But the 1,000 Suns have the Psyker abilities, and I feel like that puts them in a good third spot behind the Dark Angels and the Ultramarines. Alright, Sons of Horus next. Sons of Horus. Horus Lupercal. Lupercal. Easy. Easy. What the hell's going on here? What the hell's going on here? Okay. S tier. Easily. I don't know where I'm going to put them in S tier. I'm going to debate here. But these guys are easily S tier. So the Sons of Horus, they are the War Master's personal legion. And when I say they are the War Master's personal legion, that means as the War Master, Horus Lupercal gets all the high tech, he gets all the new armor, and thus his legion is probably the most advanced. I think all of his legion got Mark IV or Mark V armor suits, which easily puts him up as one of the most technologically advanced legions compared to, say, the World Eaters that were still fighting in Marks III or the Night Lords. So the Sons of Horus were easily outfitted the best. They had the best resources. Now, if we look at their fleet, they had one of the biggest fleets as well, with 2 Glorian class vessels. They had the Vengeful Spirit, and they had the, if I'm looking correctly, they had the Magna Trirenus. So they had 2 Glorian class vessels. So they already have a big fleet. They have already one of the biggest legions as well, with 170,000 Marines. So they have a big legion, a big fleet, a lot of technology. It's easily to put them, I would say they are ahead of the Dark Angels. Then you're saying, wait a second, the Dark Angels had 3 Glorian class vessels and the Sons of Horus only had 2. Well, the Sons of Horus had way more ships than the Dark Angels. I think the Dark Angels had around 1,000 vessels. The Sons of Horus, as they were the War Master's Legion, had close to 2, maybe 3,000 vessels. So they are easily their biggest fleet. They have a lot of legionaries, and they have Horus Lupercal, who is a genius. He is a genius military commander. He is a genius politician. He's just a genius, and he's a pretty strong Primarch himself. Probably not on the tier of, you know, Conrad Kurz or Lehman Russ or the Lionel Johnson, but he's still a competent Primarch. So I would say Horus Lupercal, pretty decent, pretty swell. I would say the Sons of Horus are easily one of the strongest legions at the start of the heresy, because Horus has made so many smart moves by sending, you know, legions away, but he's also gathered resources to his banner so that when the heresy does begin, the Sons of Horus are ready to lash out and destroy the Loyalists. So he is comparable to the Ultramarines, where he has gathered all the resources of the Imperium to himself, and he's ready to fuck shit up easily. So if we go through the Great Crusade, the Sons of Horus have some of the most compliances, up there with the Dark Angels and the Ultramarines. And then when we go into the Horus Heresy, the Sons of Horus are making all the major moves. They fight at Istvan III, they fight at the Dropside Massacre, and then they fight at Beta Garmon, and then obviously the Siege of Terra. And that's without even saying what their commanders are. They have Abaddon, the Despoiler, who would, you know, go on to be a cunt, the top-knot princess, as I like to call him. They have Horus Aximon. They just have a lot of veterans that really strengthen their ranks, you know, that were former Luna Wolves. So I feel like the Sons of Horus are just such a strong legion. I even forgot to mention how many Terminator suits they have. I mean, they just have such a well-stocked legion that it's hard to not put them in S tier. Like, they are easily S tier. And if we compare the Ultramarines and the Sons of Horus, I just feel like the Ultramarines have the 500 worlds, their own personal domain to gather from. The Sons of Horus, although they were really well fitted before the heresy began, I feel like they are simply a little bit below the Ultramarines, but they are still easily one of the strongest legions. And Horus Lupercal's influence is the main part of this, but they're also a really strong legion when it comes to battlefield tactics. You know, they have the spear point tactic, which immediately you drop pod in, you cut the head off of the command structure, you win the war without taking too many casualties. And they were honestly perfect at that. They were geniuses at that, and we see them use that time and time again, where they drop pod in, kill the leader, cut the command structure off, and win the war within days or weeks. So I feel like they are perfect at the way they fight, and easily in S tier legion. Alright, the Word Bearers are next, and this is going to be a really controversial take, and I'm going to explain myself first. So the Word Bearers are easily one of the largest legions. And you're like, what? Well, the numbers are pretty conflicting, but they either have 150k to matching the Ultramarines' massive numbers. So the Word Bearers easily have one of the largest Space Marine legions. And then we talk about the Word Bearers fleet. And you're like, Word Bearers fleet? The Word Bearers have the largest Space Marine fleet that is easily surpasses the Imperial Fist's fleet. They have 3 Abyss class spaceships. That is the largest legionary ship. It's bigger than a Glorian class, and then they have 2 Glorian class. So they have 5 capital ships that could rival a planetary defense. It's insane. And the Abyss class themselves, they do lose one of them, I'll give you that, but they still have 2 throughout the Horus Heresy. That's without even talking about the word bearers' proficiency in demonology, you could say. They are so good at that during the Horus Heresy. They are able to create the Ruin Storm. They are able to summon demons pretty much at will. And they are able to honestly see the future in some cases. And then that's without even bringing up the fact that they can summon the Netherborn to fight for them. So the word bearers have a large legion. They have demonology. They have the biggest fleet. And they have Lorgar Aurelian, who's a piece of shit, who's a terrible human being, terrible Primarch, can't duel for shit, but he himself is a pretty competent psyker. So they have a strong psyker for their Primarch, who also is pretty capable of using warp manipulation, as we see throughout the Horus Heresy, literally creates the Ruin Storm, and then they have a big fleet, they have a bunch of powerful legionaries. It's a hard debate whether to put them in S or A tier. That is the debate here. And you're like, wait, what the fuck? Why are the word bearers in the conversation for S or A tier? Well, as I just described, they're broken as fuck. I think the word bearers are insanely strong. And the only thing that makes me not want to put them in S tier is that by the end of the heresy, they are a non-factor. They are a non-factor, and that is because their legion kind of shatters when Lorgar tries to usurp the War Master throne. And I don't really know if I can hold that against them as a strong legion, but, oh man, I think I need to put them in S tier. I'm going to put them in S tier. Crazy pick. I'm putting them in head of the Dark Angels and the 1,000 Suns, because they are literally a mix of the 1,000 Suns. They have psychers, they have people who can use warp manipulation, then they just have a huge legion, they have a huge fleet. It's just impossible to put them anywhere else. But let's go through the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, and maybe I'll change my mind. So the word bearers during the Great Crusade, they don't do much because they're so obsessed with the Emperor that they stop at every single planet to preach about him. So they're very slow in the Great Crusade, and I'm not going to hold that against them. Once they stop worshiping the Emperor and put on the facade that they are, taking over worlds, they take over, I think, the most planets from the raising of what's it called, Monarch, the raising of their home planet, or the Monarchia. Is that how you say it? I don't even know how to say it. I'm illiterate, guys. Don't bully me. The burning of one of their favorite worlds. I don't know how to say it. Once that burns, and then they take up the facade of, still following the Imperial truth, even though they're still corrupted by chaos, that 40-year gap between there and the drop site massacre, they take over and they have the most compliance. I can't speak. They conquer the most planets. I'm not kidding. They take over the most planets, both to show the Emperor, oh yeah, nothing's going on. We're not worshiping warp demons. It's crazy, and that shows that they are a pretty competent legion. And that's what they're not even talking about. They have so many demon-possessed Marines. They have so many Psychers. They have so many empowered Marines. It's crazy. And then we go into the Horus Heresy, and the word bearers are easily the driving force of the heresy in the early days of it. I mean, the Shadow Crusade and the Ruin Storm is a pivotal moment in the Horus Heresy. Without the word bearers driving in to Calth and blowing up half of the Ultramarines fleet and half of their legion, the Ultramarines would have been able to get to Terra. So the word bearers are very influential on the early parts of the heresy. And then you talk about the Shadow Crusade, where the word bearers leading the world eaters across the Ultramar system, murdering people, and then creating the Ruin Storm. And that Ruin Storm traps 3 loyalist legions. It's hard to really put them anywhere but S tier. They're just so influential, and their legion is just so strong due to the combination of, their demon worship, how corrupted they are, and just the size of their space fleet that they are able to destroy, the Ultramarines at Calth. The Ultramarine worlds are not lightly defended, guys. Each of these Ultramarine worlds are heavily defended by garrison fleets, by orbital defense platforms. Like, it's hard to take these planets, and since they have 2 Abyss-class spaceships, they are able to tear through the Ultramar realm. It's crazy, and it's easily the Word Bearers are at number 3, just behind the Sons of Horus and the Ultramarines. I feel like those are pretty solid rankings. Alright, Salamanders are next. Another Shattered Legion. We have 2 more Shattered Legions, and then we're done with them. Oh man, the Salamanders, I know you guys are going to hate me, but this is such an easy ranking for me. They're easily the worst Space Marine Legion. They're the smallest. They have 1 Glorian class, very small fleet. Their Primarch seems to die constantly, and that's more of like a Games Workshop thing, because he's a perpetual, but he dies constantly. I mean, in the book Unremembered Empire, the dude dies 3 or 4 times to Eldar Shrieker rounds. It's crazy. It boggles my mind. It's insane, and that's mainly because he's a perpetual, and Games Workshop has no idea what to do with perpetuals. They're like, how to show a perpetual is powerful. Wait, let's kill him. Let's kill him 10 times. I think that's a good idea. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, John Warhammer. Let's kill him 10 times. It's like kill me. But yeah, they don't have a big legion. They don't have a big fleet. Their specialty is flamethrowers, and that's easily taken by the other legions. The Dark Angels have flamethrowers. The Word Bearers have flamethrowers. All the other legions can utilize what the Salamander's technical proficiency is. And then you could say, oh, Vulcan's is a warsmith. He creates a lot of really cool technology. When do they use it? Vulcan never uses any of the technology he makes because it's too dangerous, too risky. He doesn't want to let it fall into the traitor hands. It drives me nuts. And they just don't have a big legion. They don't do anything. They don't have a lot of compliances during the Great Crusade, and then then the Dropside Massacre happens and they get brutally destroyed. And they don't do anything. I think the Salamanders exist to do nothing. They are simply a placeholder, and it drives me nuts. Is that enough reasons to put them at D tier, guys? Like, come on. Easily the worst Space Marine Legion, and sure they save civilians, sure they care about civilians, but they do nothing besides that. If that. Like, come on. Salamanders, easy D tier. Alright. Raven Guard. This is a tough one. The next 2 are tough because the Raven Guard, like I said, they're Shattered Legion. They're also a very small legion, right? 89,000, very similar to the Salamanders. Not a big fleet at all. Probably smaller than the Salamanders, but they are very proficient at stealth. They're better than the Night Lords at stealth. Easily better than the Night Lords. But the problem with the Raven Guard is when they get into a frontal battle, like a normal battle, similar to the White Scars, they are a one-trick pony. They cannot fight well in other scenarios, and they get absolutely wiped the fuck out. Like during the Dropside Massacre, they hardly put up any fight. And I know you could say, what are you talking about, Cal? They were surrounded. Well, the Iron Hands put up such a good fight during the Dropside Massacre while they were breaking through the traitor lines. But the Raven Guard, they did not do well. And it's hard for me. I don't want to put them in D tier. I feel like the Raven Guard do not deserve to be in D tier. Corvus Corax. Let's talk about Corvus Corax. Corvus Corax is, I think he's one of the best duelists. He carves up Lorgar like a cake. But is he a strategist? Is he a genius? Not really. What do the Raven Guard do in the Horus Heresy? What do they do in the Horus Heresy? And you're like, wait, Cow. You're not supposed to talk about the Shattered Legions. Well, let's see what they do. The Raven Guard lose all but 4,000 of their legionaries during the Dropside Massacre. They go to the Emperor, they get some more seamen. They go back to Deliverance, and they immediately get sabotaged by the Alpha Legion. who are next, by the way. I thought they were supposed to be stealthy. I thought they were supposed to be really good at anti-sabotage. That's what that would imply. If that they are really good at, covert operations. Clearly not. Clearly not. What else do they do? Nothing. They do nothing. They don't have a lot of compliances, but you could say that's Corvus Corax being discovered, I think, second to last, or third to last, or second to last. Or third to last? I don't know, maybe before Angron. I think it would pay me to put them in D tier. It's tough. I'm going to put them in C tier. I'm going to put them last in C tier. Because I feel like these guys, they're more competent, which is crazy. You have the people who are obsessed with flaying people and the people that want to rip people's skulls off. Because the Raven Guard, they just don't do anything. And it's really sad. Like, they're supposed to be these stealth geniuses and covert operations, special op guys, but they don't do any of that. And it just makes me feel like they aren't a very strong legion. Which is quite sad. It's quite sad that the Raven Boys get put in the infamous C tier. Like, I really, really want Corvus Corax to shine. I want him to be a really cool Primarch, but we see him do next to nothing in the Horus Heresy except cry and be emo, which is crazy to say that because all of his sons pretty much just got murdered, but I can't justify putting them in the average legionaries because they do next to nothing during the Great Crusade. They do next to nothing during the Horus Heresy. They don't have a lot of legionaries. They don't have a big fleet. Their Primarch isn't very smart when it comes to commanding things. He's a good duelist, I guess. He could probably hold his own against most of these Primarchs, but when it comes down to it, their specialty is stealth and they aren't very good at it. C tier. That was a big rank. Big rant. Okay, Alpha Legion. Another really tough one, guys. The Alpha Legion is a really, really tough one. It's hard to gauge them, truthfully. As the 20th Legion, Alparhius and Omegon, they're playing Clue, but they threw away their game board and they're playing with chess pieces. Yeah, it doesn't make sense. And that's pretty much the Alpha Legion for you. They don't fucking make sense. So, the Alpha Legion are supposedly one of the biggest legions. Let me check my notes. Supposedly anywhere from 90,000 to 100,000. 180,000. That's such a wide range. That's almost in 100,000 range. It's just impossible to gauge them because you don't know how many guys there are. It's so silly. But the Alpha Legion, I will say, has one of the biggest fleets. They have 2 Glorian classes, and they have some of the biggest expedition fleets. So they obviously are a big Space Marine fleet. They have a big fleet, okay? I'm going to say they have a big legion. I'm just going to make that generalization that they have a big legion, and they have 2 Primarchs, okay? So what do they do during the Great Crusade? They don't have a ton of compliances because their whole way of fighting is using covert operations similar to the Raven Guard and sabotage and assassinations to slowly topple a government. And I'm not saying it isn't effective, but does it make them a strong legion? That is the question. Does it make them a strong legion? I fucking don't know. I don't fucking know. Let's look at the Horus Heresy. What did the Alpha Legion do during the Horus Heresy? Okay? Well, since their actions are so confusing, I don't know if these things are good or not. So they take part during the Dropsite Massacre, and then they fight the Space Wolves during the Alexius Nebula campaign, where they do fuck up the Space Wolves quite a bit, and then they do fuck up the Raven Guard during Deliverance Lost. That book is pretty bad. Pretty bad book. So they do have some pretty good actions, but it's hard to know what they're doing is good. Like, they let the White Scars know that the Horus Heresy is going on. And you're kind of like, surprised Pikachu face, why did you do that? Because their agendas and their orders are so conflicting, you don't know if they're loyal or traitor, and it drives me up a fucking wall. You know? Yeah. It's crazy. So it's like hard to really gauge them. Alparhius and Omegon are both not strong Primarchs. They're I think they're the height of some Space Marines. They're not very tall. Alparhius gets his head chopped off by Rogel Dorn. Their fight it's not very close. I mean, it seems like it's close, but Dorn never gets wounded. He tanks a blow from the Pale Spear, which is an obvious feint. I feel like Alparhius should have seen that coming. And then Rogel Dorn chops his hands off like he's Count Dooku on the Invisible Hand. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing? So they're geniuses, maybe a little too geniuses, and their logic doesn't make a lot of sense. So where the fuck do we put them? They have a lot of good showings in the Heresy. They do fuck with the Loyalists. They have the invasion of Pluto with their secret operatives. They infiltrated, so they're really good at what they do. But their plans are so elaborate that they fail a good amount of times. Like, there's a lot of leeway for failure. You know, like, there's something bad could happen, and their plan relies on one Marine doing one thing. Like, they snuck Alparhius, spoiler for Praetorian of Dorn, by the way. Cover your ears, so if you don't want to hear this. They snuck Alparhius, who had his mind erased, into the palace, and in order for Alparhius to remember his memory, he had to reach a certain point on their mission. There's so many flaws there, man. There's just so many flaws that I think they're so elaborate for their own good that it makes them a weaker legion. But if we're looking at the other facts, they are one of the biggest legions. They have one of the biggest fleets. They are pretty damn good at what they do, but are they a strong legion? I don't think they deserve to be in C or D. B or A. They are not S tier. I'm going to say that right now. They're not S tier. I'm going to say, since they fucked up the Space Wolves pretty damn well, I'm going to say, shit. I want to put them in A tier. I think A tier is a good spot for them, because they are very good at what they do. But in a straight up fight, I don't think they perform well. You know what I mean? Like, when the Imperial Fist realize the Alpha Legion is attacking and they counter them, the Alpha Legion gets wiped out. But I think the Alpha Legion is still a pretty strong legion. Here they would be number 10 on this list, which I feel like is a pretty good spot. You know, yeah, I'm gonna leave them in A tier. They do incredibly well in scenarios they orchestrate. They did well during the Alexius Nebula campaign. They destroyed a lot of Loyalist forces during the push towards Terra. They fought at Pluto. They pretty much took the Raven Guard out of the war. They're just really good at their covert operations, but when it comes down to it, I don't think they're one of those legions that can fight on the battlefield, you know, similar to the Raven Guard, similar to the Night Lords. Yeah, but I think A tier is the perfect spot. So that's all of them. Damn, I'm like ranting about the fucking Alpha Legion of all legions. So that's all of them. If we go through all of them, this is the ranking. Number 1, Ultramarines. I think that's easily number 1. 2, Sons of Horus. This could be anyone's game here. These 3, Sons of Horus, Wordbearers, and Dark Angels. So the difference is the Sons of Horus are really, each of their individual legionaries is completely upgraded to the max. Think of it like a Total War game. Each of them have golden chevrons on them. What a terrible metaphor. Wordbearers, they have the biggest space fleet, and they have chaos essentially on their side. They're perfectly corrupted, you could say. The Dark Angels have the best Dark Age of technology. They have cyclonic torpedoes. They're pretty much the jack of all trades, but the jack of all trades is they're the best at everything. So it's hard to say which one you'd put over here over the rest. I could say all these are tied for 2. I'm going to say that. All these are tied for 2. The 1,000 Suns, easily number 3. They have the Psyker Legionaries, but they don't have a lot of them, and they don't have a big fleet, but they have Magnus the Red. So I feel like they're at a solid 3 spot, since technically these are all number 2. Moving on, the Imperial Fist have the Phalanx. They have 2 Glorian-class spaceships. They have, obviously, the biggest Loyalist space fleet, and they are really damn good at space combat, surprisingly, almost destroying the Iron Warriors at fall. They don't have a lot of legionaries, but those legionaries are really damn good at what they do, which is defending, which is what they do during the Horus Heresy, holding the siege of Terra for a prolonged amount of time, which almost allows Guilliman to get there in time, but now dies. I'm going to say that's number 4. Okay. Iron Warriors, number 5. Right behind the Imperial Fists. They have a pretty decent fleet. They have a lot of legionaries. They're really good at siegecraft, almost probably equally as the Imperial Fist. I'm not gonna say anything, even though I hate the Iron Warriors. I'm gonna say they're equal with the Imperial Fist in what they do, which is siegecraft. They have a lot of legionaries, big fleet, genius Primarch, very comparable to Rogel Dorn. I think they're in a solid 5 spot just because they carry the Heresy, which is the equivalent of the Imperial Fist. I think both of those legions were very paramount in the Horus Heresy. We have the Blood Angels. The Blood Angels, small fleet, small legion. Why are we putting them there? Because all their legionaries and Sanguinius are so powerful with the Black Rage, with the Red Thirst. I keep saying Red Thirst like it's annoying me. Sorry guys, I'm really thirsty right now. What the fuck was that? I'm going crazy. Yeah, the Blood Angels, they're really strong Marines, really powerful, really good duelists, with Sanguinius especially. Easy A tier. Space Wolves, kind of the same exact thing, except they deploy a lot of Psychers in their legion. The Ruin Priest, very similar to the 1,000 Suns, which is quite ironic. They have Leman Russ, very strong Primarch. Just overall a pretty strong legion. They are the Emperor's Enforcers, which implies that they are really good at combat, which I feel like makes sense. So they are number 9, number 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They're 7. Alpha Legion, number 8. Kind of a tough one. They're just really good at what they do, like I just stated. Really good at covert operations. Pretty damn good showing during the Horus Heresy. They took out the Raven Guard. They fucked up the Space Wolves. They fought in Battle Pluto, which gave the traitors all the information they needed to know for the Siege of Terra. I think that cements their spot in A. We have the Death Guard, pretty average, leads the pack of the average. They did their job during the Horus Heresy. Not a lot of them, not a big fleet, but they did their job. And Mortarion, he's a decent fella. The White Scars, they are a one-trick pony, but they are really good at that trick. But when it comes to the other fights, they don't do especially well. The Emperor's Children, they are very unorganized. They are obsessed with excessive things like ketamine, and they do a lot during the beginning of the Horus Heresy, but once Fulgrim becomes a demon, they fuck off. So not a lot during the Great Crusade, not a lot during the later days of the Horus Heresy. They just become uncoordinated, but during the early days of the Heresy, they are pretty dang strong, but there's not a lot of them. They're not experienced, and they don't have a big fleet. I think that's a good, solid B tier. Iron Hands, much of the same exact thing, except they did a lot during the Great Crusade. They have a lot more. They have the same amount of legionaries, mid-sized legion, not a big fleet, but they do have the technology, but we never see them use it. So I feel like they are pretty solidly stuck in B tier. It's mainly Games Workshop's fault for that one. I'm going to blame Games Workshop like I did a little bit earlier. The Night Lords, very same story, very small legion, only 89,000 I believe. Pretty much sacrificed their legion to stop the Dark Angels from fighting during the early days of the Heresy. That's about it. They're only good at really scare tactics, fighting in the shadows. If they fight in a brute normal battle, they're usually going to lose. The World Eaters down here, they're just fucked by and nerfed by the Butcher's Nails. They can't think tactically. They will only want to kill, maim, burn. That's about sums it up. The Raven Guard get absolutely decimated. Jesus, I can't speak. Decimated during the Drop Site Massacre. What are they good at? Stealth. What do they do during the Heresy? They try to do stealth. Do they succeed? They fail. They're really good at they do a lot of hit and run tactics, but we don't see them really do any impact on the Heresy. It's pretty sad, and I think that cements their spot in C. The Salamanders, they suck. They're one trick pony. I guess 2-trick if they talk about caring for civilians, and flamethrowers, which is not a very good specialty. They don't do shit during the Great Crusade. They don't do shit during the Horus Heresy, and their Primarch constantly dies. Enough said. So let's go through it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And that about sums it up. I'm on a rampage right now. I'm like shitting on the salamanders. Yeah. But this about wraps up this video. I hope there's no script, so I hope I was like coherent while I was talking. I really hope so. I'm like going delirious right now. I need a drink of water or milk. Or is a cow drinking milk like cannibalism? Or is that like a cow drinking his own piss? I don't know how cows work, guys. Wait, I am a cow. I know exactly how cows. I got cow imposter syndrome. Yeah, I'm going crazy. So that about wraps this video up. I hope you enjoyed my rankings. If you think another Legion should be the first place spot or the second or third or whatever floats your boat, leave it in the comments. Who do you think the weakest Legion is? Is it the Salamanders? Do you agree with me? Let me know down in the comments. I'm going to try to crank out the who is the strongest Space Marine from every Legion as soon as possible. That video is 2.5 hours long, so I'm really going to try to get to it as much as I can this week. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave a like, comment, and as always, fellas and ladies, stay milked. I'll see you in the next video.